My name is Bonnie Myers, and at 33, I finally bought something that belonged to no one but me. A small cottage on the North Carolina coast. 2 bedrooms, a leaky gutter, and more quiet than I'd had in 9 years. My first night there, the phone rang, and it was my mother. She didn't say hello. She said, "We're moving in tomorrow. Your dad said it's fine." I stood in my own kitchen and held my breath. Then she added the part she always adds. "If you don't like it, you can find somewhere else." My hands shook, but I smiled, because she had made one mistake that night, and she didn't know it yet. By the time their moving truck rolled up my driveway the next morning, I had made 3 phone calls, and invited the one group of people my mother prayed would never sit in that room. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where ordinary women stop apologizing and start setting the record straight. If you've ever had a family that takes more than it gives, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and stay with me. What happened when that truck pulled in is something I will never forget. For 9 years, I worked the emergency room at a hospital outside Raleigh. Nights, mostly. I learned to walk into the worst moment of a stranger's life and keep my voice level. Nurses don't panic. We triage. We find the thing that's bleeding fastest and we stop that first. I was good at it. I was good at it for so long that I stopped noticing I had started to disappear. The last shift I worked, a man coded twice before sunrise, and we brought him back twice. And when my replacement walked in at 7, I realized I couldn't remember driving to work. I'd spent a decade keeping strangers alive and forgotten to keep myself alive too. So I quit. No dramatic speech. I filled out the form, returned my badge, and drove away in the gray morning light. People asked if I was scared. I wasn't. I had a plan, and a number in my savings account that I'd built one 12-hour shift at a time. I sold my condo in the city, the one with the gym I never used and the view of a parking garage. I took that money and the savings and I bought a cottage on the water 200 miles from everyone who knew me. It was small and old and mine. The deed had one name on it. My name. I want you to remember that, because in about a day my mother was going to forget it on purpose, and she was going to do it in front of an audience. But that first afternoon, I didn't know any of that. I only knew the air smelled like salt. And for the first time in years, nobody needed me to fix anything. You should understand what kind of daughter I'd been, because it explains why my mother was so sure of herself. In my family, I was the one who handled things. When my brother Kevin bounced a rent check at 24, I covered it. When my parents fought at Thanksgiving, I was the one who walked my father out to the garage to cool off. When Grandma Ruth got sick, I drove 4 hours every weekend for a year and slept in a recliner by her bed. Nobody ever asked me to. That was the trick of it. In my family, "Bonnie will handle it" was never a request. It was a weather forecast. My mother, Linda, said it the way other people say it might rain, and I let her, for 33 years, because saying no felt like leaving a wound open. A nurse's hands don't like an open wound. They want to close it, dress it, make it stop hurting. That instinct served strangers well. It served my family even better, and it cost me more than I ever added up. I tell you this not so you'll feel sorry for me. I tell you so you'll understand the math my mother was doing in her head that night. She wasn't asking permission to move into my house. She had never once needed my permission for anything. She had spent 3 decades watching me absorb whatever the family handed me, and she had every reason to believe I'd absorb this too. A free beach house. Of course Bonnie will handle it. That was the forecast. What she didn't account for was that I had finally moved somewhere with no one left to fix. And an empty schedule does a strange thing to a woman. It gives her time to think. About 8 weeks before that first night, I made a decision that turned out to matter more than I expected. I went quiet. Not angry, quiet. Doctor's orders, quiet. The week I left the hospital, a therapist I'd seen exactly twice told me something simple. She said, "You can't recover in the same room where you got hurt." My family was the room, so I muted the group chats. I stopped answering calls between shifts that no longer existed. When my mother texted, "Call me when you get a chance," I let a few days pass before I did, and the world didn't end. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was a patient finally taking her own prescription. For 2 months, I let myself rest. Long walks, full nights of sleep, the slow work of remembering who I was when no one was paging me. It was the healthiest I'd been since nursing school. But here's the thing about going quiet. The room keeps talking after you leave it. I didn't know that yet. I thought silence was a wall I'd built around myself. A good clean boundary. I didn't understand that on the other side of that wall, a story about me was being told to people I loved, in rooms I wasn't in, and that the longer I stayed quiet, the more the story hardened into fact. My mother had 8 weeks and a captive audience. She used both. While I was busy putting myself back together, she was telling her sister, her church friends, and half my cousins that her daughter had finally come around, that her daughter wanted to take care of her parents, that her daughter had offered. I had offered nothing. But you can't argue with a story you've never heard, and I was about to hear it all at once. Let me tell you about the cottage, because it's the only character in this story that never lied to me. It sat at the end of a sandy lane on the Crystal Coast, close enough to the water that I could hear it from bed. The porch wood was silver from 40 years of weather. The kitchen had yellow cabinets a previous owner had painted by hand, a little crooked, and I loved them more than anything I'd ever owned. There was a wicker chair on the porch that came with the place. I'd had the keys for a month, but between closing out the condo and 100 small errands, I'd only hauled the last of my boxes down that morning. This was my first real afternoon there. I sat in that wicker chair with a cup of coffee and watched the light go orange over the Sound, and I fell asleep, sitting up. When I woke, the coffee was cold and the sky was purple, and I hadn't dreamed about a patient or an alarm or a code. I just slept. Do you know how long it had been since I'd rested without earning it first? I couldn't remember. I sat there in the dark a while longer, listening to the water, and I thought, this is what I worked for. Not a thing to brag about. A thing to breathe in. I'd never had a space that was only mine. Growing up, my room was where Kevin stored his hockey gear. My first apartment I'd shared. My condo I'd bought during a stretch so busy I barely lived in it. This cottage was the first square of earth that asked nothing of me. It just held me up. I remember thinking I should call somebody and tell them I was happy. I'm glad now that I didn't. Because the phone rang on its own a few minutes later, and the voice on the other end did not want to hear that I was happy. It wanted the house. The screen said Mom. I answered the way I always did, soft and ready to help. Hey, Mom. No hello came back. We're moving in tomorrow, she said. Your dad said it's fine. I actually laughed, thinking I'd misheard. Moving in where? I asked. The beach house, she said, like I was slow. We'll be down by noon. Kevin's renting the truck. I gripped the edge of my own yellow counter. Mom, this is my house. I bought it. I live here now. There was a pause, and then her voice went flat and bright at the same time, the tone she uses when she's already decided something and is annoyed you're still talking. Bonnie, we're family. Family takes care of family. I told her carefully that we hadn't discussed this, that nobody had asked me. And she said the thing that I will hear in my sleep for the rest of my life. If you don't like it, you can find somewhere else. Find somewhere else. From my mother. About the house I'd paid for with 9 years of night shifts. I didn't yell. I want you to know that. Something in me went very still and very clear, the way it used to go right before a trauma came through the doors. She kept talking, telling me which bedroom she wanted, saying Dad needed the one with morning light. She said we so many times that I lost count, and not once did she ask a single question. Not, would that be okay? Not could we. Just we, marching into my life like the tide. And under all of it sat the line that didn't fit. Your dad said it's fine. Dad. My quiet, conflict-allergic father had signed off on taking my house. I told her I'd call her back. Then I sat down to think. Here is the part I'm least proud of, and the part that probably sounds most familiar to some of you. My first instinct was to fix it. Not fight it. Fix it. My thumb was already hovering over her name to call back and smooth everything over. I caught myself drafting the words in my head. Maybe just for a little while. Maybe the back bedroom. Maybe I could make it work, keep the peace, be the daughter who handles things. 33 years of reflex, all firing at once, telling me the fastest way out of this pain was to give them what they wanted. I sat with my cold coffee and watched my own hand shake, and I made myself stop. Triage first, I thought. You don't treat a wound you haven't even looked at. That was the rule that saved more lives than any drug I ever pushed. Look before you act. Find out what's actually bleeding. So I put the phone face down and I asked myself the real questions, the way I'd ask them about a patient I couldn't read. Why now? Why so sure? Why, your dad said it's fine, when my father had never made a decision that bold in his life. Why a moving truck already rented on a day's notice, when normal people schedule those a week out? None of it added up to a spontaneous idea. It added up to a plan, one that had been moving for a while without me, and the more I thought about it, the more one thing bothered me above the rest. Kevin was renting the truck. My broke, divorced brother, who hadn't held a job in a year, was suddenly the logistics manager for moving our parents 200 miles. I picked the phone back up. I called him. Kevin answered on the fourth ring, and I could hear a TV in the background, which meant he was in our parents' basement where he'd been living since the divorce. "Bonnie," he said too fast. "Look, before you start." "I'm not starting anything," I said. "I just have a question. Mom says you're renting a truck." A pause. "Yeah. For the move." "What move, Kevin?" Another pause, longer, and I could practically hear him deciding how much to admit. "Don't make this weird," he said finally. "Everyone already knows. It's been the plan for weeks." Everyone. Already. Knows. I kept my voice as smooth as I keep it with a frightened patient. "Knows what exactly?" "That you're taking Mom and Dad in," he said, and there was something defensive curling under the words. "At the beach. Everybody's relieved, honestly. It's been a lot around here." I asked him who everybody was. He listed them like a grocery run. Aunt Sharon, 2 of our cousins, the Hendersons from church. "Mom told all of them?" I said. "Mom didn't tell them anything," Kevin said. "You offered. Remember?" I had not offered. I had not so much as hinted. But I didn't say that to Kevin because I could hear in his voice that he believed it, or had decided to believe it, because believing it solved a problem for him too. If Mom and Dad moved to the coast, the basement was his again. I told him I had to go. He said, "Bonnie, just be cool about this, okay?" And I hung up before I could answer. I sat in my dark kitchen with the water shushing outside and one cold, clear fact settling into place. There was a story about me out there, and I was the last person on earth to hear it. I didn't have to wait long for proof. My phone lit up while it was still in my hand. Aunt Sharon, my mother's younger sister, who has never once called me without being deployed. I answered. "There she is," Sharon sang. "We are all just so proud of you, honey." I asked what she was proud of, keeping my tone light. "Stepping up like this," she said warmly. "Taking your folks in. Lord knows it's a lot to ask, but family takes care of family, and you've always had the biggest heart. Family takes care of family." There it was again. The same words my mother used, passed down the line like a casserole dish. I asked Sharon gently when exactly I'd offered to take my parents in. She laughed like I'd made a joke. "Oh, your mother told us months ago. Said you two had it all worked out. Said you wanted them close so you could look after them." Months ago. I'd closed on this house 4 weeks back and moved in only that afternoon. The closing papers were still in a folder on my counter. I asked Sharon one more question, the way I'd ask a patient to clarify a symptom without alarming them. "Did Mom say I offered or that she asked me?" There was a small silence on the line, the first crack. "Well," Sharon said slowly, "she said you offered. That's what she said." I told her I appreciated her calling. I told her I loved her. Both were true. Then I sat very still and understood what I was dealing with. This was not a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding is two people remembering a conversation differently. This was a campaign. My mother had taken a thing that never happened and walked it door to door until it became a fact in everyone's mouth but mine, and I had a day to take it apart. The strange thing was, I wasn't surprised. The longer I sat with it, the more I recognized the shape of it. My mother had been running this exact play my whole life, just never with stakes this high. She never asked. She announced, and then she let the crowd do the pushing for her. When she wanted my college graduation party at her house instead of a restaurant, she didn't ask me. She told the relatives the party was at her place, mailed the cards, and by the time I heard about it, saying no would have meant disappointing 40 people who'd already bought gifts. When she wanted me to co-sign Kevin's car loan, she didn't ask. She told Kevin it was handled, told him to pick out the car, and presented me the paperwork with my brother sitting hopeful beside her. To say no, then, was to crush him in person. She built rooms full of expectation and then stood me at the door of each one and dared me to walk out and look like the villain. It worked every time, because I cared more about not hurting people than about not being used. That was my whole life in one sentence, and I'd never seen it laid out so plainly until I was sitting alone in a cottage 200 miles away, finally outside the crowd. And that's when the plan started to form, though I didn't have all the pieces yet. If my mother's only real weapon was the crowd, the shame of saying no in front of everyone, then the crowd was also the one place she could lose. She had built her story in front of an audience. I would take it apart in front of the same audience. But first, I needed to know how far it had gone, so I called my father. My father picked up on the second ring and said my name like a man who'd been dreading the call all day. Bonnie. Just that. Dad? I said. Mom says you told her it's fine, moving into my house. I heard him breathe. My father is not a cruel man. He is a tired one. A man who spent 40 years letting my mother make the loud decision so he wouldn't have to. Your mother has a plan, he said quietly. Dad, that's not an answer. We're in a tight spot, honey, he said, and his voice cracked on the word tight. Things didn't go the way I thought they would. I asked him what things. And slowly, in the careful, ashamed way men of his generation talk about money, it came out in pieces. The business he'd put his retirement into hadn't worked. There'd been a partner, and a loan, and then there hadn't been a business at all. How bad, Dad? I asked. He didn't answer that directly. What he said was worse. Your mother handles the house stuff, he said. I don't ask. I just sign where she points. And there it was. The whole truth of my father in one line. He didn't say it's fine because he'd thought about my house. He said it's fine because he'd stopped looking at where he signed years ago. I felt the anger rise and I let it pass through me like I let everything pass through me on a hard shift. Not gone, just managed. Dad, I said. Did Mom tell you I offered the house? Long pause. She said you two worked it out. We didn't, I said. He went quiet. Then, almost too soft to hear, he said, Oh. Just oh. As if a small light had come on in a room he'd kept dark on purpose. We hung up, and I went to find the folder. Before I tell you what was in that folder, I have to be honest about the moment that came first, because it's the moment a lot of you will know in your own bodies. After I hung up with my dad, the fixer in me came roaring back. They're broke, I thought. Dad's ashamed. They've got nowhere to go. You have a whole second bedroom. What kind of daughter lets her elderly parents twist in the wind over pride? I sat there, and I genuinely talked myself most of the way toward yes. I opened a text to my mother. I typed, Okay. We need to talk about the rules, but okay. My thumb hovered over send. And I want you to understand. That text wasn't kindness. I've spent enough years around real kindness to know the difference. That text was the old wound trying to close itself the fast way, the way that scars wrong and aches every winter for the rest of your life. Saying yes wouldn't have saved my parents. It would have rewarded a lie, taught my mother the campaign worked, and handed Kevin a beach house to circle. It would have meant that the first thing I ever owned alone became, within 24 hours, one more thing the family used. The water shushed outside. I made myself read the text I'd typed one more time. Then I deleted it, word by word, until the box was empty. My hand had almost stopped shaking. And right then, before I could feel proud of myself, the phone buzzed in my palm with a notification I hadn't seen in 2 months. A group chat lighting up. The name at the top read, in cheerful little letters, Myers Family. 41 unread messages. I had muted it back when I went quiet. I unmuted it, and I started to read. But before I scrolled, I did the thing 9 years of nursing had drilled into me. I gathered my chart. You don't walk into a hard conversation with a family without your facts in order, and I wasn't about to walk into mine. I went to the kitchen drawer where I'd put the closing folder 4 weeks earlier, the day I got the keys. It was a plain manila folder, already a little soft at the corners. I opened it on the yellow counter under the one good light. The deed was on top. I'd read it before, of course, at the closing, while a kind real estate attorney named Ms. Albright walked me through every page. But I read it again now, slowly, the way you read a lab result that's going to decide what you do next. Grantee. One name, Bonnie Marie Myers. Not and, not or. Not my mother, not my father, not Kevin, not the Myers family. One name, mine, recorded with the county. I sat with that single line for a while, and something settled in me that no amount of guilt could move. The cottage wasn't a feeling. It wasn't a favor I owed or a kindness I could be shamed out of. It was a legal fact with my name on it, recorded in a courthouse, and no story told at a church potluck could change a word of it. I remembered Ms. Albright's card, paper-clipped inside the folder. I set it aside where I could find it. Then I propped the deed against the backsplash so I could see it, took a breath, and picked the phone back up. The Myers family chat was still glowing. 41 messages. I scrolled to the top, to where it all started, and began to read what my family had been saying about me while I had the world on mute. The first message that mattered was from my mother, dated 3 weeks back. Big news, everyone, it read. Bonnie has finally agreed to do right by us. We'll be moving down to her place by the water this fall. Below it, a string of hearts and praise hands from aunts and cousins. So happy for you all. What a blessing. Bonnie always was the responsible one. I scrolled down, my coffee long forgotten. My mother had posted again a week later, a photo of my cottage. My cottage, the silver porch, the crooked yellow cabinets visible through the window. With the caption, our new place by the water. Can't wait. Our new place. She'd lifted the photo from the listing I'd sent exactly one person, my father, in a moment of pride. There were messages about which church she'd joined down here. A message asking if there was room for Kevin, too. Just while he gets back on his feet. A message from Aunt Sharon. Bonnie is such a good girl to take this on. And then, near the bottom, the one that made the floor tilt under me. My cousin Dana had posted a screenshot. It was a real estate listing. My parents' house, the brick ranch I grew up in, the one with my height marked in pencil on the laundry room door frame. And stamped across the photo in red letters was a single word, under contract. The message under it read, "Congrats Aunt Linda and Uncle Ray on the sale, onward to the beach." I read it 3 times. They hadn't just decided to move in with me, they had sold their house, signed a contract, set a closing date. They had cut the rope behind them and were standing at the edge of a cliff that was my front door, betting everything they owned that I would never let them fall. My mother hadn't asked me for a home. She had told the whole family I'd already given them one, sold the only one they had, and left me exactly one acceptable answer. Yes. I put the phone down. My hands were perfectly still now. I sat with it for a long time, and I let myself feel the whole shape of it before I decided anything. This was not a panicked old couple with nowhere to go. That's the story I'd nearly rescued an hour earlier. The story that almost got my parents a key to my front door. This was something colder and more deliberate. My mother had looked at my healing, my hard-won quiet, the one thing I'd ever built for myself, and she had seen real estate. She'd seen an opportunity to solve her problem with my future, and she'd seen it so clearly that she'd sold her own house on the strength of a yes I never gave. She didn't ask me to share my home. She told everyone I'd already given it away, and then she made it true the only way she could, by making the alternative unthinkable. If I said no now, I wasn't refusing a request. In the story she'd built, I was throwing my homeless parents onto the street out of selfishness. That's what the crowd had been told. That's the headline 41 Messages had agreed on. And for one more minute, the old fear had its hand on my throat. Then it let go, and it didn't come back. Because I finally understood the rules of the game I'd been losing my whole life. My mother's only weapon was the audience. The shame only worked because the audience believed her version and never heard mine. She'd spent 3 weeks loading that weapon. But a weapon like that has a flaw. It points both ways. Every single person she'd told a lie to was a person who could hear the truth. She had gathered my jury for me. All I had to do was call them to the same room, at the same hour, and stop being quiet. I knew exactly when that hour would be. Noon, tomorrow, when the truck arrived. I want to pause here, because I know some of you are sitting with that exact knot in your stomach right now. The one that says, if you say no, you become the bad guy. I felt it in a house I'd paid for with 9 years of my own work. If anyone has ever told you that your boundary was an insult, stay with me through what comes next. Hit subscribe, and let's keep going, because this is where it turned. Something changed in me after I put that phone down. For 33 years, I'd asked myself a question every time my family pulled at me. Am I being selfish? It's a good question for a child. It's a trap for an adult. That night, sitting under my crooked yellow cabinets, I stopped asking it. I asked a different one instead. One I'd never once let myself ask out loud. What do I want tomorrow to look like? And the answer came so fast and so calm that I almost laughed. I wanted the truth in the room. All of it. Before I built the plan, I made sure the ground under it was solid, because a nurse doesn't hang a treatment on a guess. I thought back to the closing, to Ms. Albright explaining things I'd half listened to because they seemed like distant problems. She'd said the deed was titled in my name alone, sole ownership, recorded with the county. She'd said that meant the house was mine to do with, as I pleased. Full stop. I remembered asking, half joking, whether my mother could ever make trouble about it, because some part of me always braces for that. Ms. Albright had smiled and said the thing I now held onto like a railing. A promise made at a dinner table isn't a deed. In her words, a verbal agreement to give someone property doesn't transfer anything. The law wants it in writing, signed, recorded. My mother could tell every relative in 3 states that I'd offered her the house. She could believe it herself. It would have exactly the same legal weight as a wish. The only document that mattered was sitting against my backsplash with one name on it. I won't pretend the law was the whole battle. The law doesn't stop a moving truck from pulling into your driveway. It doesn't stop your mother from crying in front of your aunts and calling you heartless. But it meant that when the noise came, I'd be standing on stone instead of sand. They could not make me let them in. They could not stay if I said go. Everything past that point was just my mother's favorite weapon, the crowd, the shame, the performance. And I had finally figured out how to turn it around. I picked up Ms. Albright's card. It was nearly 9 at night, but lawyers have email, and I had a long night ahead. The plan was almost embarrassingly simple, which is how I knew it was the right one. The complicated plans are the ones built on revenge. This wasn't revenge. This was a dressing change. You clean the wound, you expose it to air, you let it heal honest instead of festering under a bandage of nice lies. My mother had built her whole position in front of an audience that only ever heard her side. So I would simply make sure the audience heard mine, in the same room, at the same time, with the documents on the table. No yelling, No accusations she could spin into me being unstable. Just the truth, laid out flat. While the people she'd lied to sat and watched her try to argue with a deed. The beauty of it was that I didn't have to invite anyone with a trick. I'd invite them with the truth too. I'd call my aunt and my cousins and tell them I was so glad they were excited, and would they like to come down for a little housewarming the morning my parents arrived. Of course they'd come. They thought they were coming to a happy ending. They were coming to the truth, which is a different thing, and sometimes a better one. I made a short list on the back of an envelope, the way I used to write out a shift plan. 1. Email Ms. Albright tonight. 2. Confirm the locks. 3. Invite Sharon and the cousins for the morning. 4. Set out coffee like a person with nothing to hide, because I didn't. I looked at the list. 4 lines, 1 email, and a single call left to make. The rest of the arsenal was already spent. And remember those 3 phone calls I mentioned at the very start? The ones I'd made before that truck pulled in? 2 were already behind me, my brother, then my father, on the night it all began. The 3rd was the one that would decide the morning, and I'd make it the moment the sun came up. I emailed Ms. Albright a little after 9. I kept it short and factual, the way I'd write a handoff note. I told her my parents intended to move into the property the next day, that they believed they had a right to, and that I wanted to understand exactly where I stood and whether I needed anything in writing. I didn't expect an answer until morning. She wrote back in 40 minutes, which told me she'd seen this kind of thing before. Her reply was calm and clear, and I read it twice. She confirmed what I remembered. The property was mine alone. No one else had any legal interest in it. A verbal claim, no matter who made it or how many people they'd told, conveyed nothing. She wrote that I was under no obligation to allow anyone to move in, and that anyone who entered and refused to leave would be there without my permission, which is a thing the law has plain words for. Then she offered something I hadn't asked for but was grateful to have. She said if it would help, she could put the essentials in a short letter on her firm's letterhead, confirming my sole ownership that I could keep on hand. Sometimes, she wrote, people argue with a daughter who won't argue with a lawyer. I told her yes, please, and thank you. By 10:30 there was a 1-page PDF in my inbox, my name, the parcel number, the recording date, and 2 dry sentences confirming that the home belonged to me and that no other party held any claim. I printed it on the little printer in my new spare room. I slid it into the manila folder, right behind the deed. 2 pages now, one from a courthouse, one from a lawyer. Quiet pages, the loudest things in the house. The second line on my envelope said confirm the locks, and I almost laughed when I crossed it off because there was nothing to do. I'd already done it without knowing I was protecting myself. When you buy a house, any decent person at the closing tells you to change the locks, because you never know how many keys are floating around from the last owner. Ms. Albright had told me exactly that 4 weeks earlier, and I'd done it the same afternoon I got the keys, long before I ever carried a box inside. A locksmith had come out and rekeyed the front door, the back door, and the side door off the kitchen, and he'd handed me 3 shiny keys on a ring, and those were the only keys to my house that existed in the world. My mother didn't have one, my father didn't have one. Kevin, who I'd later learn had been talking like he'd be staying in the spare room, didn't have one. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I wasn't locking my family out. You can't lock someone out of a door you never gave them a key to. I had simply, from the day the house became mine, treated it like it was mine, because it was. The locks weren't a weapon I built for the war. They were just the ordinary good sense of a woman who'd finally bought something and meant to keep it. I stood at my front door that night and turned the deadbolt, felt it slide home solid and clean, and I thought about how many times in my life I'd left a door unlocked for people who walked through it and rearranged the furniture. Not this one. I turned off the kitchen light. I had 1 phone call left to make in the morning, and it was the important one. I called Aunt Sharon at 8 the next morning, early enough to catch her before the day got away, late enough not to seem strange. I made my voice warm, and I didn't have to fake it. because I do love her, and because the warmest thing I could do for her was stop letting my mother use her. Sharon, I said, I'm so glad everyone's excited about the move. Oh, we are, she said. We surely are. I was thinking, I said. Mom and Dad are coming down around noon. Why don't you and Dana and Beth come too? Make it a little housewarming. I'd love to have the family see the place. There was a pause, a happy one. Oh, honey, we'd love that. Are you sure? On moving day? I'm sure, I said. It's important to me that everyone's there. And that last part was the truest thing I said all morning, though Sharon heard it one way and I meant it another. She started planning what to bring, a coffee cake, some of her good chairs in the van. I let her. I told her noon, and to come a little before if she could. She said she'd round up the cousins. When I hung up, I sat for a second with the strangeness of it. I had just invited my mother's own witnesses to watch her story come apart, and they'd thanked me for it, and they were bringing coffee cake. I wasn't proud, exactly. It was more like the feeling after you finally set a broken bone right. A hard, clean ache, and under it, relief. I made a fresh pot of coffee. I set out mugs, more than I needed. I put the manila folder in the kitchen drawer, closed but not hidden. Then I sat on my silver porch in the wicker chair, and I waited for my family. A lot of people, when I've told this story, ask me the same thing. Why didn't you just call your mother back and scream at her? Tell her off. Let her have it? Here's what I learned working trauma for 9 years. The loudest person in the room is almost never the one in control. I didn't need volume. I needed witnesses. If you've ever figured out the hard way that the calmest person in the room usually holds the most power, then you already understand the morning that was coming. Share this with someone who needs that reminder today. Then stay with me, because the truck is about to pull in. I should tell you I slept that night. Really slept. Deep and dreamless, in the back bedroom with the window cracked so I could hear the water. The morning of the hardest conversation of my life, I woke up rested. That's how I knew the fight was already over. Somewhere it counted. The rest was just waiting for everyone to find out. Sharon and the cousins arrived at 11:40, 20 minutes before noon, exactly as I'd hoped. Sharon swept up the porch steps with a foil-covered coffee cake and her good folding chairs, and Dana and Beth came behind her with a thermos and a bag of clementines, treating it like the family reunion they thought it was. "Oh, Bonnie," Sharon breathed, looking out at the water. "It's a little piece of heaven." It was. I'd thought so myself, sitting in that same chair the evening before everything started. I poured them coffee in my mismatched mugs and let them wander the small rooms, and they cooed over the crooked yellow cabinets and the silver porch and the cracked window with the sea breeze coming through. Beth asked which room would be mine and Mom's, and I just smiled and said the coffee was fresh. I didn't lie to them. I want that on the record. I never once said the words my mother put in my mouth. I just let them stand in my house, in the sunlight, full of warmth and clementines, and I let them be exactly as glad to be there as they wanted to be. Because in about 15 minutes, every one of them was going to need to remember that I had been kind, that I had been calm, that I had set out coffee and welcomed them in. The contrast was going to matter. Sharon was mid-sentence about her garden when we all heard it. A heavy engine, downshifting, then the long crunch of tires turning off the sandy lane onto my gravel drive. Through the front window, a white moving truck nosed into view, too big for the little driveway, and behind it my father's old sedan. My family looked at me, delighted. I set down my mug. "Right on time," I said. I want to describe how they got out of that truck because it tells you everything about what my mother thought was happening. The passenger door opened first, and my mother stepped down like a woman arriving at a property she already owned. She'd dressed up, pressed slacks, the good earrings, her hair set. She surveyed the cottage, the water, the porch, with a small, satisfied nod, the nod of a person confirming that a thing she'd been promised had been delivered. My father climbed out of the sedan slowly, and he did not look at the house. He looked at his shoes, at the gravel, at the sky, anywhere but the front door, and I understood that my phone call the night before had finally turned a light on in that dark room, and he couldn't unsee what was in it. And then Kevin dropped out of the truck's cab, stretched, and hauled open the back to reveal it stacked floor to ceiling with their lives, boxes labeled in my mother's handwriting, kitchen, linens, Ray office, a recliner, a headboard, the contents of a sold house, every piece of it riding on the bet that I would fold. My mother started up the walk with her arms already opening, and her eyes found the porch. And that's when her stride changed. Because the porch wasn't empty. Her sister was standing on it with a coffee cake. Her nieces were behind her with clementines and bright, confused faces. And me, in the doorway of my own house, calm as a Sunday, holding a coffee mug. For just a second, half a step, my mother hesitated. I watched her recalculate, watched her decide the audience was a bonus, a crowd to perform her arrival for. She fixed her smile back on and came up the steps. "Well," she announced to everyone, "we made it." What happened next, my mother handed to me herself. She walked into my living room like a tour guide, and she performed. "Oh, it's smaller than the pictures," she said, running a finger along my windowsill. "But we'll make it work. Ray, the morning light's in the back. That's our room." She turned to Sharon and beamed. "We've been planning this for months, haven't we, Bonnie? It just makes sense. Family all together." She told Dana that Kevin could take the second bedroom until he's sorted. She told Beth she was thinking of repainting the yellow cabinets, something more neutral. She stood in the middle of the house I bought with 9 years of night shifts, and she gave away its rooms one by one to an audience she trusted to be charmed. And the whole time, I just watched. And I let her, because every word she said was a brick I wouldn't have to lay myself. Sharon's smile had gone a little fixed. She kept glancing at me, waiting for me to join in, to laugh and agree, the way I always did, and I didn't. I just stood by the kitchen drawer with my coffee and let the quiet build. My mother didn't notice the quiet. She'd never had to notice my quiet before, because I'd always filled it for her. She kept going, planning Thanksgiving in my dining room, telling Beth which church she'd join, and the more she talked, the more the gap showed between her story and the calm, unmoved woman standing in the doorway of a house that clearly already belonged to someone. Finally, she clapped her hands together, bright and final. "All right," she said. "Kevin, start with the kitchen boxes. Bonnie, honey, where do you want our things?" The room turned to look at me, and I set down my mug. "Before we move anything," I said, "I want to make sure everyone here understands the same thing, because I think there's been some confusion." My voice was easy, conversational, the voice I use to tell a family their loved one is stable. My mother's smile tightened. "Bonnie, this isn't the time." "Mom," I said gently, "tell everyone again, the way you told them before. What exactly did I agree to?" She blinked. "We discussed it. You wanted us close." "When?" I asked. "When did we discuss it?" "Months ago," she said, but her eyes flicked to Sharon checking the room. "On the phone." "I closed on this house 4 weeks ago," I said. "I moved in yesterday. What month did I offer it to you?" The pause that followed was the first real silence my mother had ever lost. Sharon shifted on her feet. Dana frowned and looked at her phone, at something, maybe doing the same math I'd done. "You sent me the listing," my mother said, recovering, pivoting fast. "You wanted to show me—" "I sent the listing to Dad," I said. "One person. The night I got the keys. Because I was proud." I turned to my aunt, kept my voice warm because none of this was her fault. "Sharon, when Mom told you I'd offered the house, did I ever, even once, say it to you myself?" Sharon's mouth opened and closed. "Well," she said slowly. "No. Your mother said—" "I know what my mother said," I told her, still gentle. "I just need everyone clear that I never said it." The room had gone very still, the good chairs and the coffee cake and the clementines all forgotten. My mother's face had started to change, the performance cracking at the edges, And that's when I opened the kitchen drawer. I took out the manila folder and I set it on the dining table where everyone could see it, and I opened it flat. 2 pages. I didn't raise my voice once. "This is the deed to this house," I said, turning it so Sharon and the cousins could read it. "There's one name on it. Mine. Not Mom's, not Dad's, not the family's. Mine." I laid the second page beside it. "And this is a letter from the attorney who handled the sale. It says the same thing. The house is mine, and no one else has any claim to it." I looked at my mother, and I kept my voice as level as the water outside. "A promise made at a dinner table isn't a deed, Mom. You can tell people I offered. You can believe it. It doesn't move a single brick of this house out of my name." For one heartbeat, nobody breathed, and then my mother exploded. "After everything we did for you," she said, and her voice climbed and cracked, "you'd put your own parents out on the street? In front of family? I raised you, I gave up everything, and you stand there with a piece of paper?" She was loud now, loud enough that Beth flinched, her face going red and wet, the pressed slacks and set hair forgotten. "We sold our house, Bonnie. We have nowhere to go. Is that what you want? To humiliate us? To throw us away like garbage?" She wanted me to match her, to get loud, to become the unstable, ungrateful daughter the story needed me to be. I didn't. I stood there with my hands folded and let her storm break against the quiet, and the quieter I stayed, the louder and smaller she got, until the only person performing in that room was her. And the audience she'd gathered to shame me was watching her instead. "You didn't sell your house because of me," I said, when she finally stopped to breathe. "You sold it before you ever asked me. There's a difference, and everyone in this room can see it now." My mother stared at me, chest heaving, and asked the question she'd never once in her life had to ask me directly. "So what are we supposed to do now?" The whole room waited, and I gave her the only answer that fit. The same words she'd given me on the phone the night before, in the same even tone she'd used, returned to her exactly as they'd left her. "If you don't like it," I said, "you can find somewhere else." The silence after that was total. Sharon set down her coffee cake on the table like it had gotten heavy. Kevin, who'd been hovering in the doorway with a box marked kitchen in his arms, slowly bent and set it on the floor, and didn't pick another one up. My father had sat down in one of Sharon's good folding chairs without anyone noticing, his hands hanging between his knees. My mother looked around the room for her allies, the crowd she'd built, the chorus that always pushed for her. And one by one, they wouldn't meet her eyes. Dana was reading her phone, the screenshot of the listing, the dates. Beth was looking at the floor. Sharon was looking at her sister with an expression I'd never seen her aim at my mother before. Not anger. Something worse for my mother than anger. Doubt. The audience had heard the other side at last, in the same room, at the same hour. And the weapon my mother had spent 3 weeks loading had just gone off in her own hands. I'd be lying if I told you I felt nothing but victory, because that's not how it went. And you've trusted me this far, so I won't start lying now. When my mother realized the room had turned, the fury drained out of her all at once, and what was left underneath it was the thing she'd been hiding behind the performance the whole time. Fear. Plain, old, human fear. She was 63. The house she'd raised us in was sold. The money my father swore he'd handle was gone. And she had just been seen, completely, by every relative whose respect she'd spent a lifetime managing. For one moment, she didn't look like my adversary. She looked like a frightened woman who had made a terrible bet and lost it in front of everyone. And some part of me, the part that spent 9 years holding the hands of scared people, ached for her. I want to be honest that the ache was real. I also want to be honest that it didn't change my mind, and I think that's the part it took me 33 years to learn. You can feel for someone and still not hand them your house. You can be sorry someone is afraid and still not let their fear become your responsibility. I felt sorry for my mother that morning. I just stopped. Finally, feeling responsible for her. Those are two different things. It only took me my whole life to tell them apart. They didn't move in. There was nothing left to argue once the deed was on the table and the room had gone quiet. Kevin carried the kitchen box back out to the truck, and the rest of their lives rode back up the coast that afternoon, unloaded later into a storage unit my mother could afford even less than her pride. Sharon stayed after they left. She sat with me on the silver porch and apologized. Really apologized, her hands shaking around her coffee. "She told me you offered," Sharon kept saying. "I never thought to ask you. I should have asked you." I told her it wasn't her fault, and I meant it. That's how the weapon worked. It only needed people who loved my mother enough to believe her without checking. My parents rented a 2-bedroom apartment near their old neighborhood within the month, the kind of modest place they could have chosen from the start, the kind that didn't require anyone's house but their own choices. Kevin, with the basement no longer a sure thing, found a job. Not a great one. A job. And the family group chat, the one that had filled with 41 cheerful messages about my generosity, went very quiet, and then slowly came back to life as something more honest, a place where, for the first time, people asked me how I was, instead of telling me what I'd agreed to. I didn't cut my parents off. People expect that to be the ending, the clean break, the door slammed forever, and it wasn't. A week later, I emailed my mother a list of senior apartments in their county, 3 of them, with phone numbers, places that fit their budget. That was all. Not money, not my front door. A list and a phone number. The help I was willing to give, freely, on my terms, instead of the help that gets taken from you and called your duty. She never thanked me for it. But my father called a few weeks later, just to talk, and at the end he said, quiet as ever, "I'm glad you kept your house, Bonnie." It was the closest he could come to saying the rest of it, and I took it. I see them now and then, on my terms, at my pace, with the truth finally sitting in the room with us instead of a story told behind my back. It's not the family I dreamed of as a girl, but it's an honest one, and it's the first one I've ever been able to rest inside. If there's one thing I learned in that cottage by the water, it's this. A home isn't something you're owed because you share a last name. It's something you build, and the people who truly love you ask to be let in. They don't announce they're already inside. That's my story. One phone call, one deed, and one quiet morning by the water. If there's someone in your life who keeps mistaking your kindness for an open door, take this as your sign. Change the locks, or make sure, like I did, that you never handed over the key. If this reached you, share it with someone who needs it today. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.